Breaking news, FBI and ICE arrest 5,000 in Chicago raid on Sinaloa and CJNG. 4 tolls of fentanyl seized. Now we'll see how it plays.
By imposing a 5-year ban on lobbying by executive branch officials and a lifetime ban.
What happens to a nation when the streets fall silent at 4 a.m., not because the city is asleep, but because thousands of federal agents are already moving into position for the largest cartel takedown in modern American history? And what does it mean for national security when the people being led away in handcuffs are not only drug traffickers, but sheriffs, border inspectors, and federal officers sworn to defend the country? The question cut through the darkness like a warning flare revealing a battlefield hidden inside the United States itself. Under President Donald Trump, federal agencies had prepared for a confrontation unlike any domestic operation in decades. The surge began with an uncomfortable truth: the enemy had already breached the walls. The operation ignited simultaneously across 22 metropolitan zones: Chicago, Phoenix, Miami, Houston, New Jersey, Kansas City. In every city, the same choreography unfolded: helicopters cutting through the pre-dawn air armored vehicles, rolling quietly into position, and breach teams waiting for the signal. According to federal briefings and corroboration by major outlets like Reuters and BBC, the synchronized strike marked the most extensive joint action undertaken by the DEA, FBI, ICE, and Homeland Security in the borderless war against the Sinaloa and CJNG cartels. The target list was not a handful of safe houses, it was an entire infrastructure. Within hours, more than 5,000 suspects were in custody, drug labs shuttered, distribution nodes extinguished, financial hubs seized, over $200 million in narcotics, weapons, and assets confiscated. But the moment that stunned investigators was not the contraband. It was the discovery that men and women inside America's own institutions had sold their badges as officials later described. The infiltration was systematic, intentional, and deeper than past intelligence assessments had believed. This revelation elevated the surge from a criminal operation to a national security event. Analysts from The Guardian and DW noted that the scale of corruption suggested cartel strategies that resembled foreign intelligence agencies more than traditional criminal gangs. Identical shell corporations, identical cash smuggling routes, identical encrypted hubs appearing in city after city. The cartels no longer behaved like traffickers. They operated more like paramilitary multinational intelligence networks. Strategically, this operation signaled a major recalibration of U.S. power. President Trump's administration, already prioritizing border security, now faced evidence that American institutions had been compromised from within. The balance between security and freedom tightened. Counter-cartel campaigns began merging with counterterror frameworks. Defense News reported that military intelligence assets were quietly redirected to support domestic interdiction, highlighting the administration's intention to treat cartel networks as hybrid threats capable of undermining national sovereignty. Yet behind the numbers and tactical victories was the human impact. Communities across the Midwest and East Coast, many devastated by fentanyl overdoses, watched the news with a mix of relief and fear. The operation tore open the reality that fentanyl pipelines were not abstract threats from distant regions. They ran through neighborhoods, police departments, airports, and local governments. The crisis had never been just about drugs. It had always been about the fragility of the system meant to protect American lives. As dawn broke over the cities affected by the surge, one question remained suspended in the air, unanswered but impossible to ignore. If the cartels can infiltrate the agencies sworn to stop them, how far must America go to reclaim its own security? And who will stand guard when the next breach appears? What if the beating heart of America's fentanyl crisis isn't on the border at all, but in a city long known for steel freight and rail? Dawn revealed an uncomfortable truth. Chicago was not just another battleground. It was the central artery of an industrial-scale drug empire supplying the entire eastern half of the United States. Federal agents had long suspected the Sinaloa and CJNG cartels were embedding themselves deep inside critical infrastructure, but the surge exposed the full scope. Chicago wasn't merely a transit point, it was the operational core. The city's vast logistics network made it the perfect command hub. Rail hubs, interstate highways, cargo airports, warehouse grids, each one became a node in a sprawling supply chain. According to field intelligence and reporting patterns, consistent with Reuters and the Guardian cartel operatives used industrial shipping channels the same way global corporations move electronics produce or medical supplies. Only their commodity was exponentially deadlier fentanyl, a substance so potent that 2 milligrams can stop a human heart. Every month, massive quantities of precursor chemicals flowed from China and India disguised as common industrial solvents. BBC and DW analysts noted that these shipments often moved without raising suspicion, given the enormous volume of legitimate goods passing through Chicago's freight corridors. Once inside the city, the chemicals were routed to cartel super labs across Mexico. There, chemists engineered millions of doses within days, doses that would soon travel north hidden in farm trucks, Amazon-style delivery vans, and tractor trailers. The uploaded report describes how Chicago became the staging area where these nationwide shipments were broken down into smaller loads, distributed to Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and the entire eastern seaboard. With each shipment, the cartels operated like multinational logistics firms, regional managers, accountants, chemists, private enforcement units. Their control wasn't chaotic, it was structured digital corporate. Strategically, this raised alarms in Washington. Under President Trump, intelligence agencies warned that the cartel's transformation mirrored the evolution of insurgent groups around the world, enterprises blending illicit economies, territorial dominance, and political influence. Defense News compared the Chicago hub to the way militant groups abroad use cities as command and distribution nexuses. The implication was clear: the US was facing not just a criminal threat, but a shadow network capable of undermining national stability. Meanwhile, the human impact spread like invisible fire. More than 100,000 Americans died of overdoses each year, nearly 70% linked to fentanyl. Midwestern morgues reported capacity crises. High schools in Indiana and Pennsylvania now stored Narcan beside fire extinguishers. Daily life in entire regions adjusted to a chemical threat arriving through supply chains too vast, too efficient, and too well concealed for local law enforcement to fight alone. Chicago's role became a symbol of both vulnerability and resolve. If the crisis could thrive in the heartland inside one of the nation's most essential logistics complexes, what did that say about America's internal defenses? And as the surge pushed deeper into the networks that sustained this illicit empire, the defining question sharpened. If the cartels can turn America's greatest infrastructure into their greatest weapon, how long can the nation rely on its existing systems before demanding something far more powerful in return? What happens when a nation realizes the enemy it has been fighting for decades has built an invisible network stretching from Phoenix to Miami, from Long Beach to Boston, and every city looks exactly the same? The surge's next phase shattered any remaining illusion that the Sinaloa and CJNG cartels operated as fragmented gangs. They were synchronized, industrial, and dangerously efficient. Federal intelligence described them as mirror networks, twin machines, running identical operations across the United States. And the only way to break a machine was to dismantle every piece at once. The nationwide offensive unfolded in two brutal phases. Phase 1 targeted Sinaloa's synthetic pill empire. At 4 a.m., Phoenix lit up first. Helicopters thundered over quiet suburbs as flashbangs carved white light through garage windows. Behind those walls, agents found pill mills capable of pressing millions of counterfeit oxycodone tablets, each one laced with enough fentanyl to kill. Within days, more than 2,500 Sinaloa-linked suspects were taken into custody. Agents seized $85 million in assets, encrypted ledgers, industrial chemical drums, and multiple high-capacity pill presses engineered for mass production. But that was only half the war. Phase 2 turned towards CJNG, the cartel known for expansion through terror. The battlefield widened dramatically. At the port of Long Beach, America's maritime lifeline, cargo cranes froze mid-operation as tactical teams surrounded container ships marked as industrial cleaning supplies. Behind reinforced steel walls, they found thousands of kilograms of precursor chemicals, the building blocks of fentanyl manufacturing on a catastrophic scale. Miami followed next. Homes, condos, and waterfront properties linked to cartel real estate laundromats accounts were raided, revealing cryptocurrency wash cycles masquerading as legitimate investments. These were not simple safe houses, they were financial engines powering a transnational criminal state. Then came the highways. In Houston, federal agents intercepted a convoy of tractor-trailers on Interstate 10. Beneath crates of produce sat hundreds of military-grade firearms, AR platforms, 50 caliber rifles, conversion kits, equipment intended to arm cartel enforcement units operating with paramilitary discipline. This was not the toolkit of smugglers. It was the weapons inventory of an insurgent organization preparing for battles both inside Mexico and across US borders. Strategically, these seizures changed the intelligence assessment. Reporting from Al Jazeera and Reuters reinforced what federal analysts had already concluded: the cartels had evolved into hybrid entities, part criminal syndicate, part militant force, part multinational corporation. Breaking their logistical networks required coordination on a scale the US had rarely attempted domestically. Under President Trump, agencies received expanded operational authority and began treating cartel hubs as foreign-linked threat zones operating on American soil. The results were staggering. Boston saw 85 CJNG affiliates arrested. Kansas City dismantled regional command cells. New Jersey and Maryland watched entire East Coast distribution corridors collapse overnight. The numbers told the story: more than 5,000 arrests and over $200 million in narcotics, cash, weapons, and infrastructure eliminated. And yet, hidden beneath the celebration was a darker realization, one that federal agents could not ignore. If these networks were this large, this uniform, and this deeply rooted, then how much deeper did the machinery go? And if this was only the operational layer, what would America discover when it finally peeled back the final veil? Because the next phase investigators warned would not target drugs, guns, or stash houses. It would target something far more dangerous: the cartel's financial shadow, an empire built to survive any takedown. What if the most dangerous battlefield in America wasn't the border, the ports, or the highways, but the bank accounts, shell companies, and political contracts quietly hijacked by cartel money? As the surge unfolded, investigators discovered that the real war was not only fought with guns and raids. It was fought with wire transfers, crypto wallets, and municipal deals that turned corruption into infrastructure. The Sinaloa and CJNG cartels weren't just smuggling narcotics. They were building a financial shadow empire designed to penetrate the American system from the inside out. Federal intelligence units had spent months tracing the invisible lines connecting Chicago's cash drop houses to Miami's shell corporations, Houston's trucking contracts, and New Jersey's real estate laundromats. The pattern was unmistakable. Cartel revenue flowed like engineered circuitry, precise, repetitive, and globally layered. Cash from street-level operations was funneled through front companies disguised as trucking firms, sanitation contractors, consulting groups, or import-export agencies. From there, the money migrated into offshore cryptocurrency exchanges where anonymity became armor. Once cleansed, the capital re-entered the United States appearing legitimate. It purchased real estate, it funded business expansions, it paid for luxury imports, high-end vehicles, and political donations. The method was no longer bribery in envelopes. It was sanitized influence, contracts, development projects, campaign finance channels. BBC and DW analysts noted that these methods resembled techniques used by oligarch-linked networks in Eastern Europe, blurring the line between criminal enterprise and political infiltration. The uploaded report revealed the full extent of this corruption. The same accounts financing cartel gun shipments also paid city contractors, police union vendors, and even donors tied to local officials. The implications were devastating. This was not opportunistic corruption, it was systemic capture. The cartels didn't just buy individuals, they fed the bureaucracy itself. For the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, this was the breaking point. Cases emerged nationwide. In El Paso, a border protection officer waved through trucks carrying narcotics and undocumented migrants. In Arizona, Internal Affairs investigators uncovered years of ignored warnings about cartel-linked bribes. In multiple states, sheriffs, inspectors, and federal personnel were indicted for selling access protection or silence. Strategically, the intelligence community saw an evolution that aligned with reporting from The Guardian and Al Jazeera. The cartels had become hybrid threat actors. They wielded economic, political, and social influence with the sophistication of hostile foreign organizations. Their financial architecture mirrored insurgent financing models used in conflict zones from Afghanistan to parts of Africa where illicit wealth corrodes governance from within. Meanwhile, the human cost grew unbearable. Every dollar laundered through these shadow channels represented lives lost to fentanyl overdoses over 100,000 a year. Each manipulated contract or compromised official created openings for more shipments, more weapons, more deaths. Communities struggling with addiction watched the crisis spiral, unaware that the machinery enabling it wasn't only in Mexico, it was embedded in American institutions. This raised a chilling question: if cartel money can flow through political systems without resistance, what stops it from rewriting those systems entirely? And as the financial shadow empire grows, what protections remain for a nation that must defend itself not only from external enemies, but from corruption seated within its own foundations? What happens when the shield meant to protect a nation begins to crack from the inside? The surge had exposed drug labs, stash houses, financial hubs, and encrypted networks, but the most disturbing discovery came when agents realized that the cartel's reach extended into the very institutions sworn to defeat them. The war was no longer just external, it had moved into sheriff's departments, federal inspection posts, and even specialized homeland security units. And the question hanging over Washington was no longer, how do we stop the cartels, but how do we save the system the cartels have already infiltrated? Dozens of arrest records told the same story. County sheriffs, border inspectors, federal officers, agents who once stood in front of classrooms and declared an oath to serve and protect were now being walked out of departments in handcuffs. They had not been coerced. They had been paid, bought, integrated into the cartel ecosystem like employees in an illicit corporation. The uploaded file details how these individuals sold their badges, providing a level of access that allowed criminal enterprises to move through secure points with disturbing ease. Institutional fatigue played a critical role. After emergency border directives, thousands of new hires were pushed through Homeland Security and border protection pipelines. Background checks were abbreviated. Temporary clearances were issued as a norm rather than an exception. Local departments overwhelmed by fentanyl deaths accepted emergency funding with minimal oversight. Suddenly, the perfect storm existed: more personnel, more money, deeper pressure, but far fewer safeguards. Major news agencies including Reuters and DW highlighted similar patterns in other global security failures. When systems expand faster than oversight can stabilize them, cracks form, and those cracks become gateways for corruption. The cartels exploited this exactly as modern insurgent groups have done overseas, embedding within institutions until loyalty became a currency they could purchase with precision. Strategically, this infiltration posed a threat far more severe than narcotics distribution. If criminal networks could compromise supervisors, inspectors, and even internal affairs personnel, they could manipulate the flow of intelligence, alter evidence chains, and engineer operational blind spots. The battlefront had shifted from fields and ports to offices and command rooms. According to analysts from Al Jazeera and The Guardian, this kind of systemic infiltration mirrored tactics used by foreign intelligence services aiming to destabilize adversaries from within. Meanwhile, the human impact rippled through communities. Every compromised officer meant another shipment crossing undetected. Every ignored warning meant another school, another neighborhood, another family exposed to fentanyl shipments disguised in everyday commerce. For civilians, this was not just a law enforcement scandal. It was a direct assault on the fabric of trust between the public and the uniform they rely on. This left America confronting a haunting dilemma. National strength depends not only on military power or presidential authority, but on the integrity of the institutions that form the nation's shield. If that shield fractures what remains between citizens and the forces determined to poison them, and if corruption can spread quietly and visibly through systems designed to keep the country safe, how long before the nation must choose between rebuilding the shield or watching it fall? What does it mean for a nation when criminal syndicates evolve into foreign terrorist organizations, and the only way to fight them is to shift from policing to warfare? The surge had exposed corruption, dismantled supply lines, and severed cartel command nodes, but senior officials warned that none of it would be enough unless the United States changed its posture entirely. The cartels were no longer behaving like criminal gangs. They operated like paramilitary states. And under President Donald Trump, the administration made a decision that would redefine America's security doctrine for an entire generation. The executive order hit Washington like a seismic wave, the Sinaloa and CJNG cartels were officially designated foreign terrorist organizations. Overnight, the legal landscape shifted. This declaration opened the door for the Pentagon, traditionally restricted from domestic law enforcement, to integrate intelligence, surveillance, and operational support alongside the DEA, FBI, and Homeland Security. It became clear that the surge was not simply a law enforcement action. It was the first phase of a counterterror strategy crafted to dismantle hybrid adversaries capable of destabilizing both Mexico and the United States. Defense News and Reuters reported that military intelligence assets were reassigned with unprecedented speed, reflecting the urgency behind the new terrorist classification. Defense Secretary Pete Hecht described the mission as a whole-of-government counterterror campaign. The message to cartel leaders was uncompromising. If you operate like insurgents, you will be treated as insurgents. This meant the United States could now target cartel networks the way it targets foreign terrorist infrastructures, mapping nodes, intercepting communications, choking financial arteries, and disrupting supply chains with military precision. For the first time, U.S. Northern Command was authorized to provide real-time ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance support to domestic operations. Policing became battlefield strategy. Strategically, this reshaped America's global posture, as BBC and DW analysts noted. Treating cartels as terrorist organizations signaled to allies that Washington intended to reclaim its national security footprint. It also served as a warning to foreign governments accused of tolerating precursor chemical flows and money laundering pipelines. Suddenly, fentanyl production was no longer a public health crisis. It was a transnational threat with geopolitical consequences. Nations enabling these supply chains could face diplomatic, economic, or military pressure. Yet the victory came with a sobering reality. More than 150 Americans continued to die every day from synthetic opioid overdoses. Cartel chemists could rebuild labs in days. Crypto laundering cycles could regenerate capital within weeks. And the surge exposed a deeper vulnerability. Corruption had already penetrated portions of the American system. Even with 5,000 arrests and massive seizures, the integrity of national institutions remained fragile. Communities across the Midwest, East Coast, and Southwest watched as the federal government escalated its counter-terror posture. For families who had lost children to fentanyl, the shift felt long overdue. For civil liberties advocates, it sparked difficult questions about the balance between security and freedom. Could America defend itself without undermining the very principles it sought to protect? Could a nation preserve its identity while waging a war on its own soil against enemies embedded within its institutions? As the counter-terror framework expanded, one final question lingered, a question that reached beyond politics, beyond borders, beyond the surge itself. If the cartels have evolved into an insurgent force capable of poisoning a nation from within, what must America become to stop them, and will the country remain the same once the war is won? The nationwide surge revealed a hidden war that had been unfolding inside the United States long before federal agents moved at 4 a.m. Across 22 cities, synchronized operations exposed the Sinaloa and CJNG cartels not as fragmented criminal groups, but as multinational paramilitary-style organizations with deep influence inside America's infrastructure. Chicago emerged as the central artery of a fentanyl empire built on global chemical sourcing, industrial-scale production, and a distribution network that stretched across the Midwest and East Coast. Federal teams dismantled pill mills, raided ports, seized financial hubs, and intercepted weapon convoys. Yet the most alarming discovery was internal corruption. Sheriffs, inspectors, and federal officers had been absorbed into cartel ecosystems, eroding public trust and revealing systemic vulnerabilities. Laundered money flowed through shell companies, cryptocurrency exchanges, municipal contracts, and political donations, creating a financial shadow empire capable of influencing governance itself. Recognizing the escalating threat, President Donald Trump designated the Sinaloa and CJNG cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, unlocking military intelligence, surveillance, and counter-terror authority. But despite 5,000 arrests and historic seizures, fentanyl deaths, institutional fatigue, and corruption remained severe challenges. The core question now: can America defeat adversaries embedded inside its borders while preserving the freedoms and institutions that define the nation?